I'd never been in the igloo when this stuff was taking place. So I know that when they build the igloo, which is a separate subject, but when you test the snow and it's the right kind of hardness to make the snow blocks, then you know how big you want the igloo to be, and you take your knife and go around, and on one half of it, you leave that alone, and to start with, and then the other half you stand up, which becomes the beginning for the snow block house. But when it's finished, there's the floor, and up here is this part you left alone, which becomes a sleeping bench. And then they cut a hole through that so you can access the door. And the first day, you can have a lamp of some kind inside. But a lamp is hot, and it raises the temperature enough that it melts the snow on the inside, so the snow is no longer porous. And that little hole that you had in the top for air to come in the door and out the top is now glazed over. And so you have to actually cut a hole in the roof to allow circulation. No such thing as a door. When you have the igloo finished, you take a few blocks like this and put it around the front to break the wind. But they're a lot tougher people than we are.
What sort of clothing did you wear? We've heard I've seen photos of Henry Larson wearing Inuit type clothes. What kind of things did you wear?
How long have you been there?
Sorry?
I'm asking a legal question. How long have you been there?
I don't know.
Take a guess.
2 years?
Well, when you first go there, you're going to wear white man's clothing.
Right.
Right.
And as it wears out or doesn't get laundered and smells like crazy, then you're going to take and convert to native clothing. And so now you have 4 choices. You have one caribou skin with the fur out, and another one with the fur in. And that becomes your whole wardrobe, unless you happen to be a good hunter and you got 2 of them. And when it's cold, you wear it with the fur in, and not so cold with the fur outside. But as it gets colder, then you add another skin on it. So one is fur inside, skin, and then if you have a second layer, you have fur and the skin on the outside.
And where did you get these from? Did you trade for them? Did you buy them from the Inuit? Did you make your own?
How's that now?
Where did you get the native clothing from them? Did they make it for you, or did you do it yourself?
Well, if you live 300 miles from the trading post, what would be your option?
You made it yourself.
You made it yourself, number one.
But did you make it yourself?
Oh, I don't know about that. The first thing you got to do when you get a caribou is skin it, and you're going to use that outside skin, inside or outside, as part of your clothing. The rest of it you're going to eat.
But for the RCMP, you and the crew, where did your clothing come from? The skin clothing.
Well, whatever clothing we were wearing, white man's clothing outside that's in the suitcase or something, we maybe had that. But once you get to the point where that stuff needs to be laundered, you're not going to wash it because it freezes, okay?
Right.
Then you're going to wear native clothing. And then you got two choices, fur in or fur out.
Now tell us about having a bath on the St. Roch.
Oh, you like that story? Well, we've just been on a boat, and you know how much room there is. And so we had at that time in the aft section of the boat was this one room. And the room had a little heater in it, and it had on the opposite wall, it had some shelves and books, and between the two was the skipper's chair, a walk-through, and then a table where everybody ate. And we had a thing in the middle of it called a fiddle, that every pot we had on there fit one of these holes, so when you're at sea and the boat does this down, your dinner stays on the table with you, okay? Because if you don't do that, you don't eat. And it's a hell of a mess to clean up beside.
For sure.
You cannot believe how far this thing can roll.
Yeah. You mean the roll, the pitch?
Well, you get the roll and the pitch.
Yeah.
And the pitch was enough coming across the Pacific
Yeah.
with the high wind we had that the boat was not designed for, that the water, the boat would put its nose down underwater by maybe this much. And the seawater would come running over the top, down onto the top of the forecastle and down that deck. So when the guys wanted to go aft to have something to eat, they would get up the little stairs by the door and wait till the water started pouring down. And then they'd open the door and run like hell to get over the well deck before the next wave. It wasn't dull, it kept you active.
Did you have any fun on the ship? Did you have fun? What did you do for fun?
How to describe fun?
Games? did you guys play board games? Cards?
We played a little bit of cards, I guess. Not much, because it only takes one deck of cards to start a few fights.
That's a great quote.
Well, you know, people, who knows what, they want to talk to each other, or a social society, and somebody says something that somebody takes offense at. I might say that I don't like short-haired blondes. You might have a sister that's short-haired blonde and be offended because you got nothing else to do.
Were there very many conflicts amongst the crew members?
That's a hard question. How do you describe a conflict?
Well, were there arguments? Were there fights? Were there people who quit talking to one another for a while?
There was no physical fighting.
Larson
I
probably
give
didn't
the
allow
guys
it.
credit.
Yeah.
They were under a lot of stress.
Mm.
And you might not think about being on a boat as being and the room we had there was not much, but when you're with four other guys or three other guys in the space that we have on this boat. And you had, well, on one time on the cargo, well, down below the deck was fuel, big fuel tanks on the sides of the engine, and forward was the the quarters for the crew, and same thing when you came aft of the engine room. There was a passageway where you came downstairs, then there was a galley where they cooked, and then in behind that was where we had four guys. And you ate, slept, and drank. Everything in that space is about half the space of this table.
Right.
And the first day, maybe you can stand it. But after you've been sitting, well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of us. How would you like it if somebody locked the door out there and left us alone for 6 months? You would talk about everything in the world. You're not getting any mail. You can write all the letters you want, but no place to mail them. Where we were at Paisley Bay, it was 300 and some odd miles to copper mine. When Frenchie died, the skipper and Pat Hunt went to get a priest. I think it took them 6 weeks. I don't remember exactly, but they went maybe 300 miles by dog team down to Churchill. You can look on the map and see a hell of a long way. They were going maybe 40 miles a day on foot with the dog team to get the priest to bring them up so that this mound we had with Frenchy under it could be blessed by him. And then he stayed around for a while till he recovered the priest and got to know our guys and so on. Eventually he had to go back to work by himself. And when you're 400 miles away from home, there's not a street sign on the whole distance. You better have a pretty damn good feeling of where it's north and south. And in particular, you want to know what time of year it is, because during the wintertime, there's no sun coming up to tell you. Now, ordinarily in the summertime here, you could dump me out in the forest someplace, and I could tell you pretty close to what time it was and where north is.
How many men on the boat, Dean? How big was your crew? How many men total?
We had 8.
Including the skipper?
Yes.
Yeah.
Was Henry Larson quite a tough taskmaster?
Pardon me?
What was Henry Larson like as the skipper and chief in charge of all of you?
I have had a lot of exposure to Henry. And when you have that many people, and 8's a lot under those circumstances, Henry had his own cabin, and he was a particularly well-informed navigator, and he had been probably the only boat in the Canadian Northwest Territories that went anywhere with a boat, and there's no maps. There's no charts. When you're going along here, nobody had ever been down there before. No government agency gone there and made a plot. So you're going along, and all of a sudden the boat stops. Why did it stop? Because there's a sandbar up there. No chart, you don't know. So on your charts, you mark it so the next time you know. So in that way, the skipper contributed a lot to whatever maps there may be, or could have been. And as an individual, I would have nothing but really high regard. Now we're looking at the oldest guy on the boat and the youngest guy. And we would sit and talk for a long time. And Henry was a fine guy. He had a family. He respected his family. I don't know how they put up with his being absent so long. Jack Foster was the cook, and he had a wife, and I have no idea what their family life was like when he was at home. And the cook had a wife. And so they each had families, and I don't know
When you were on the ship, did you have any idea of the history that you were making?
No. We had direction from headquarters to service the mounted police detachments, because the mounted police are saddled with the federal government telling them you police this territory. And so they had detachments. You had to take something in there for the guys to live in. And that was how Cambridge Bay was started. That's how Copper Mine was started. Okay. And then there was another place, Tuktoyaktuk at the mouth of the Mackenzie River. But there was nothing. There was miles of nothing. You could go out and walk all day. And the light would change. That's all.
When you think back now, how important do you think that voyage was in terms of Canadian history?
What effect do you think China is having?
No. What effect do you think the voyage of the same Roch through the Northwest Passage, how important was that for Canada, and how important is that in our history?
I'm answering the same way I did before. What effect does China have on what you're doing?
Okay.
Those people on the other side want that territory up there as badly as Canada does. Why? Because Canada is maybe one of the wealthiest countries in the world. They have this big geologic feature called the Canadian Shield that goes from Hudson Bay and goes south as far as Toronto and then follows along on a curve up to Alaska. All along the edge of that Canadian Shield, you look, and if there's a factory or a mine that is producing copper, iron, you name it, Canada has it. All they got to do is dig it up.
So true.
The natives up around the top end of this thing make snow knives or build igloos. They're a blade about so long, and they make a big bone handle. And then they go around looking for some copper on the ground to make the rivets.